Okay, so after a long time, I'm recording something. So I don't really know how to start this video. Like, I genuinely sat here for 5 minutes, just staring at the camera, thinking, how do I even explain the last 2 years of my life? All right. So, but I think the most honest way to start is just to say that I failed 9 interviews, both on campus and off campus, before I got the first offer. Yeah, and I got placed last year itself in August 2025. So I'm talking about my internship and placement interviews both. And luckily, placement season started in July itself, so I got placed within 1 month of the starting of this placement season. And I'm not saying that for sympathy. I'm not saying that to make this some kind of comeback story. I'm saying it because I think if someone had sat me down before my first interview and told me what actually happens in this process, I would have prepared completely differently. So that's what this video is. It is not an advice, it is not a motivational video or motivational speech. It is just me talking honestly about what I went through and what I learned through this process. All right. And hopefully, you'll get a lot of good insights from this. So, first of all, who am I? So, a quick background. I graduated from NIT Rourkela with the B.Tech in this May 2026 itself. And I'm joining the company in which I got placed in July itself as a software engineer. And between these two sentences, graduating and joining, there is about a year of interviews, rejection, online assessment, and that went nowhere. Rounds I thought I cleared but didn't. And one night where I genuinely sat on my hostel bed at 1 a.m. thinking maybe I'm not just good enough for this. And that's the year I want to talk about. Because most content you see online is either grind LeetCode for 6 months and you'll crack FANG, or some guy with a perfectly structured 10 tips to crack placement season video. And look, those videos have value. I have watched them too, but they never really told me why I was failing. That's the part nobody explains well. Okay, expectation versus reality. So I have made these bullet points so that I can explain these topics clearly. So when I started placement season, I was honestly kind of confident, like not arrogant, but I thought I had a decent shot because I had done competitive programming for 2 years. I had few projects which were good for that time, and I had solved more than like 500 problems on LeetCode. I thought, okay, this is enough. I'll clear online assessments, get to interviews, explain my projects, and land a job. Right? That was the plan. And it seemed reasonable at that time. First online assessment I gave, cleared it. I was happy. First interview, I bombed it. And it was off campus, by the way. Completely bombed it. And I remember walking out thinking, just what just happened? The interviewer asked me a DSA problem. I had solved that before. I knew the approach, but when I started explaining it, I just don't know. My thoughts were all over the place. I was jumping between different approaches. I wasn't explaining my reasoning clearly, and I could literally see the interviewer's expression change. At the end, he asked me one CS fundamental question, something about operating system, very standard, and I gave a notebook answer, mugged up. And he asked one follow up, and I just froze. I didn't get through. And I thought, okay, this happens, bad day. But it happened again and again. All right, first few failures. Okay. So by the third rejection, I started paying more attention to what was going wrong. And one thing I noticed, almost every interviewer at some point would ask me to explain my thinking. Not just give me an answer, explain the thinking. And that's where it kept falling apart for me. See, when you practice lead code alone, you solve the problem in your head. Maybe type a code, check if it passes, move on, right? There is no one sitting across from you asking, why did you choose this approach? What's the time complexity? Can you optimize this further? What if the input was different, right? So nobody prepares for that part. I definitely didn't. And this is something nobody really tells you. Solving a problem and explaining a problem is a completely different skill, like genuinely different. I cannot stress this enough. I remember one interview where I actually got the right solution, correct code, passed all test cases mentally, but I couldn't clearly articulate why my approach was better than the brute force, right? And the interviewer pushed back once, just once, and I completely lost my confidence mid explanation. I started second guessing myself, changed my answer, and made it worse, right? So he didn't reject me because I didn't know the answer. He rejected me because I couldn't clearly think under pressure. And that was the turning point. But honestly, it took me a few more rejections to actually internalize it. Because the next thing I thought was, okay, I need to do more lead code. I'll solve 100 more problems, that'll fix it. Okay, what I slowly started noticing. After about the fifth or sixth rejection, something changed in how I was analyzing what went wrong. I started writing things down after every interview. Not the question, not what should I have answered. I started writing at which moment did the energy shift? When did the interviewer's tone change? And what was I doing at that point? And I noticed patterns. The energy always shifted when I was unclear, not when I was wrong, when I was unclear. Sometimes I'd give an answer that was technically correct, and the interviewer would probe once, and I'd hedge immediately. I'd say things like, I think this is right, or I'm not 100% sure. And once you say that, the interview is basically over. Not because you were wrong, but because you showed that you didn't trust your own reasoning. And the flip side was also true. I noticed in a few interviews that went better. The ones where I said, I don't know the optimal solution right now, but here's how I'm thinking about it. And those went better than when I pretended that I knew something that I didn't, right? Interviewers can tell. They do this every day. You cannot fake things, right? You cannot fake depth, you cannot fake clarity. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think interview performance is about knowing the maximum number of things, and it is not. It's about how clearly and confidently you reason through what you know, right? There's a huge difference between those two things, and you need to internalize it. What interviewers actually test? Okay, so let me just say this plainly because I think it needs to be said clearly. A technical interview, especially at a product company, is not a quiz. It's not a test of how many lead code problems you have solved. It's not even fully about whether you get the right answer. It's a simulation. They are simulating. They are simulating what is it like to work with this person. When they hit a problem that they don't know answer to, what do they do? Do they panic? Do they think clearly? Or do they communicate? Can I trust this person to work independently? That's what they are evaluating. The DSA problem is a vehicle. The fundamental question is a vehicle. Even your project discussion, it's a vehicle. The destination is always how does this person think? And I think freshers, I definitely did this. We get so obsessed with preparing the vehicle that we forget about the actual destination. I used to think that if I just know the right answer, I'll get through. And that's not how it works, especially now. These days, companies expect much more from freshers. The market has genuinely changed. When I talk to seniors who placed 3, 4 years ago, the bar has moved significantly. Back then, clearing DSA and basic CS was often enough. Now you are expected to have more project depth, system design basics, good communication, fundamentals, DSA, all of it together. And that's the reality nobody warned me about when I was going in. The communication problem. I want to spend some time on this because I genuinely think this is the most underrated skill in placements. The interview communication is not about being fluent, it's not about having a good vocabulary, it's not even about being confident in a traditional sense. It's about one thing: clarity of thoughts under pressure. And the reason most students fail at this, including me for a long time, is that we never practice it. We practice solving problems alone. We practice memorizing answers by doing it again and again. We don't practice explaining or reasoning to another human being who might push back. There is a specific kind of panic that happens in interviews. Someone asks you something you half know, and your brain starts to do five things simultaneously, trying to recall the answer, monitoring the interviewer's expression, worrying about time, right? Second guessing yourself, and trying to speak. And all of it comes out as this like jumbled, unconfident, hedged. And I knew this was happening. I just didn't know how to fix it. What actually helped me, and I know this sounds basic, was mock interviews, real ones, with another person, not practicing in front of mirror, not lead code timed mode, sitting across from a person, even a friend, and explaining your approach out loud while they stare at you. And it will be beneficial if you have some senior who can help you with this mock interviews, because I had some seniors who used to help me with these mock interviews. Because the discomfort of being watched while you think, that's the actual skill that you need to build. Confidence is not loudness, confidence is not clarity, It's about the ability to say, okay, I'm not sure about the optimal solution immediately, but let me start with the brute force and we can optimize. And say it without your voice shaking. That sentence, when it is said calmly, is more impressive to an interviewer than someone who jumps straight to the optimal solution and then fumbles when they push, right? This sounds obvious now, but at that time, I genuinely didn't understand it. Why projects matter differently now? Okay, projects. So, here's the thing about the resume projects that nobody explains well. The project on your resume is not a decoration, it's not a signal that you know how to code. What it actually is an invitation for the interviewer to probe. And if your project is surface level, if you followed a tutorial, changed the UI and deployed it on Vercel and called it yours, then the interviewer will know within two questions, right? I have seen this happen to friends. I had and I have also had it happen to me in a slightly different way. So I had a project, I generally worked on that, but I hadn't revisited it in like 6 months. And the interviewer asked me, why did you use this particular architecture for the backend? And I couldn't answer clearly. Not because I didn't know in general, but because I hadn't thought about that specific decision in the context of my own project. And here's the thing about that moment, it didn't just hurt my project score, it raised a flag about my ownership. Because if you have genuinely built something, you understand why you made that particular decision. So, good projects only help you if you can go in deep on them, right? If you cannot, it's actually worse than having no project at all. Because now you have created an opportunity for the interviewer to expose a gap. So, if you're watching this and you have projects on your resume, please revisit them. Think about every technical decision. Why that database? Why that framework? What is the architecture of your backend? And why have you made that in that particular way? What were the scaling limitations? That depth is what separates someone who built something to put on a resume versus someone who actually learned from building it. So, why interview difficulty has increased? So, I want to be honest about something that I think a lot of people don't want to say out loud. The market is harder. It's genuinely harder. It's not just that you need to work harder. The bar itself has shifted. Like, part of it is the hiring freeze that happened across the industry in 2023, 2024. Fewer roles, way more applicants, so companies got stricter. Part of it is that resources became so accessible that average candidate is more prepared than before. And when everyone has access to LeetCode, NIT code, Stiver's sheet, the floor rises, right? So what used to be a good preparation is now just a baseline. And part of it is that companies, especially the mid-sized product companies, have been burned by hiring people who could crack the interview but couldn't actually function on a team. So they have made interviews harder to test for things like communication, ownership, and depth. So freshers are now expected to know things that were previously only expected from people with 1 or 2 years of experience. System design basics, scalability thinking, real project experience, uh, and that is the reality. So, and I think a lot of placement preparation culture in India hasn't caught up with the shift. There's still too much emphasis on clear and online assessment, mug up HR questions, know your project, and that formula worked 3 years ago, and it doesn't fully work now. And we need to understand that the students who are making it through, they are not just more prepared in quantity, they are prepared differently, they think differently, they communicate differently, the mindset shift. So somewhere around the seventh rejection, and something changed in me. Not in a dramatic way, not in a cinematic way. It was more quiet than that. I stopped treating interviews as tests I needed to pass. I started treating them as conversations that I needed to have. Right? I know that sounds like advice from a LinkedIn post, but hear me out. Because the practical change it made was real. When I went in thinking, like, I need to pass this test, every question felt like a trap. Every pause felt like failure. Every probe from the interviewer felt threatening. When I went thinking, I am going to show this person how I think, the dynamic changed. I stopped panicking when I didn't know something immediately. I started saying, let me think through this out loud and actually doing it. I stopped trying to give perfect answers and started giving honest and reasoned ones. And interestingly, I got further in those interviews than I had before. I also stopped attaching my self worth to each individual interview, and that one took longer because After ninth rejection, a natural human response is there is something fundamentally wrong with me. And that's a hard thought to shake. What helped me was separating performance from identity. A bad interview means your preparation or communication or both need work. It doesn't mean you are incapable. It means there's a specific gap, and find that gap, fix it, move forward. Many students fail not because they are dumb, because they cannot communicate under pressure. And that's a fixable problem. That's a trainable skill, not a personality trait, right? So, what finally changed for me, all right? So, what actually changed? A few things, honestly, not one magic thing. First, I started doing regular mock interviews with people, real people, not timers, not lead code competitive mode, actual humans watching me explain things, right? Second, I stopped adding things to my preparation list and started going deeper on what I already know or what I already had. So, less breadth, more depth, all right? I revisited every project, I understood every decision, I could defend every line of my resume. Third, I started practicing something I call thinking out loud while studying. Like when I solve a problem alone, I explain it to an imaginary person out loud. It feels stupid, but it builds the exact muscle that you need for an interview, right? Fourth, and this one I resisted for a long time, I got honest feedback. Not from friends who would be nice to me all the time, from people who would tell me when my explanation was unclear. That's uncomfortable, but it's the only way to know where is the actual gaps and that gap needs to be fixed, right? And at the same time that these things compounded, my communication got cleaner, my confidence got more grounded, not louder, just clearer, and interviews started feeling different. I realized this after failing again and again. The problem was rarely that I didn't know enough. The problem was almost always I couldn't show what I knew effectively. Okay, so final thoughts. I'm not going to give you a list of 10 tips. You can find those everywhere. What I will say is interview process is genuinely hard right now, and the people who told you it's just about grinding lead code, they either placed 3 years ago or they just got lucky or they are not being fully honest. It takes TSA, it takes fundamental, it takes project with depth, it takes communication, and it takes the ability to stay clear headed when someone is watching you think. That's a lot, I know, but the good news is all of it is buildable. None of it requires you to be born talented, it requires you to practice the right things. Don't panic after one bad interview or five. Just figure out the specific things that went wrong. Fix that, go back. And please don't confuse clearing online assessments with being the interview ready. The online assessment filters out people who cannot code at all. The interview filters out people who cannot think, communicate, and show depth. They test completely different things. Okay, one last thing. When I got placed, it was genuinely surreal because I remember that night at 1 a.m. in my hostel, and I remember thinking this was never going to work out. And it did work. Not because I suddenly became brilliant, but because I finally started preparing for the actual interview, not the imaginary one I had in my head. Keep improving, understand the process deeply, and please don't attach your self worth to one interview or five or nine. You are more than your last rejection. Figure out the gap, keep going. And keep one thing in your mind that sometimes your friends will get placed, and some of them are lucky. Like, not everyone needs this much of learning to pass the interview. Some people are lucky, some interviewers have different opinion about different people, so they might reject you and they might take your friend, right? You don't need to get disheartened from that. All right, that's it. If this resonated at all or if you have been through similar things, let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how many people felt this way but never talked about it. I know this is a different type of content on my channel and I generally don't upload this type of content, but I think people needed it, so yeah, I posted it. All right, see you in the next one. Till then, keep learning. I'm watching you.